Ambassador Zethkar stared at the red marks on his tactical display. Each mark showed a world lost to the enemy. Each red dot meant millions of lives under hegemony control. The insect-like aliens had taken 37 star systems in just 3 years. At this rate, the core worlds would fall within 6 months. The tall, blue-skinned Valani diplomat rubbed his temples. His species prided itself on logical thinking. They could solve any problem with enough data and careful analysis. But the hegemony was different. Every negotiation ended the same way. The bug-like creatures would listen politely, then crush whatever offer the Confederation made. "Sir, the council meeting starts in 10 minutes, his aide whispered. Zethkar nodded and walked toward the Great Hall. Representatives from 43 species filled the massive chamber. Their worried voices created a buzz of different languages and sounds. Some clicked, others hummed, and a few spoke in musical tones. All of them sounded afraid. Council leader Vorthen called for silence. The ancient being's 4 arms gestured to the display screen. "Friends, we face our darkest hour. The hegemony has rejected our latest peace offer. They demand complete surrender of the Outer Rim territories." Angry shouts filled the chamber. The bear-like Corvins roared their displeasure. The crystalline Zealites chimed in harmony, expressing their fear. The gas-breathing Nethans floated nervously in their protective suits. "We cannot give them what they want," declared General Vexon of the Corvins. "My people will not bow to insects." "But we cannot win this war," replied Counselor Ythara of the Zealites. Her crystal body flickered with worried light. "They are too strong, too organized, too smart." Zethkar stood up slowly. All eyes turned to him. As head of the diplomatic corps, his words carried great weight. "I have studied every negotiation with the hegemony. They follow perfect logic. They never make mistakes. They calculate every advantage and use it against us." "Then what do you suggest?" asked Vorthen. The Valani diplomat took a deep breath. What he was about to say would shock everyone. "We need to try something they cannot predict, something that does not follow their logic." Confused murmurs filled the hall. Zethkar continued, "I propose we invite the humans to join our negotiation team." The chamber exploded with noise. Half the representatives shouted in anger. The other half laughed at what seemed like a joke. Humans had only joined the Confederation 5 years ago. They were new, strange, and completely unpredictable. The humans? General Vexon growled. "Those emotional creatures? They barely understand basic diplomacy. That is exactly why we need them," Zethkar replied. "The hegemony has defeated us because they can predict our every move. They know how we think. They know how we negotiate. But humans are different." Counselor Ythara's crystal body pulsed with uncertainty. "Different how?" "They make decisions based on feelings, not just facts. They tell stories instead of presenting data. They break rules we did not even know existed." Zethkar paused, letting his words sink in. The hegemony has never faced anything like them. "This is madness," declared Ambassador Kelther of the Nethans. His voice echoed strangely through his breathing apparatus. "Humans are too new, too wild. They will ruin everything." "Everything is already ruined," Zethkar said quietly. "We have lost 37 worlds. Our fleets retreat every month. Our people live in fear. What exactly are we afraid of losing?" The chamber fell silent. Everyone knew he was right. The war was already lost using traditional methods. Vorthen raised one of his 4 arms. "All in favor of inviting human representatives to the peace negotiations?" The vote was close. 22 species voted yes. 21 voted no. It was enough. 3 days later, Captain Jake Morrison received the message at Earth's diplomatic headquarters in Geneva. The former soldier-turned-diplomat read the invitation twice before believing it. His assistant, Lieutenant Amy Walsh, looked over his shoulder at the screen. "They want us at the peace talks?" she asked. Morrison nodded. "Apparently, we are their last hope." "No pressure there," Amy said with a nervous laugh. Morrison had spent 10 years in the military before joining the diplomatic corps. He understood war, but galactic politics was still new to him. Earth had joined the Confederation during peacetime. This would be humanity's first major crisis as members of the galactic community. "What do you know about the hegemony?" Morrison asked his computer. The AI displayed information on the screen. The hegemony consists of 7 insect-like species. They value order, efficiency, and logical thinking. Their society is built on strict hierarchy. They do not understand concepts like mercy or compromise. "Sounds charming," Amy muttered. Morrison continued reading. The hegemony had never lost a negotiation. They approached diplomacy like a mathematical equation. Find the other side's weakness, apply pressure, and take what you want. It had worked against every Confederation species. "Sir, why do you think they asked for us?" Amy wondered. Morrison leaned back in his chair. "Because we do not think like them. Hell, we barely think like our own allies half the time." Amy pulled up files on previous negotiations. "Look at this. Every peace talk follows the same pattern. The Confederation offers logical compromises. The hegemony demands more. Eventually, the Confederation gives up and retreats." "Sounds boring," Morrison said. "Boring, but effective." Morrison studied the reports for hours. The other diplomatic teams had tried everything. They offered territory, resources, trade agreements, and technology. Nothing worked. The hegemony just kept taking more. "Amy, what if they are asking the wrong questions?" Morrison said suddenly. "What do you mean?" "Everyone assumes the hegemony wants territory or resources. But what if they want something else? Something that cannot be measured or calculated?" Amy frowned. "Like what?" "I do not know yet. But I think we need to find out." Morrison called a meeting with his team. Along with Amy, he gathered the people who would help him prepare. There was Dr. Lisa Carter, a specialist in alien psychology. Commander Pete Jackson knew military tactics and strategy. Together, they would represent humanity at the most important negotiation in galactic history. "All right, people," Morrison began. "We have 2 weeks to prepare for something no human has ever done before. We are going to try to make peace with an enemy that has never made peace before. Any ideas where we start?" Pete asked. Morrison smiled. "We start by forgetting everything we know about normal diplomacy, because normal has not worked." As the team began their preparations, none of them realized they were about to change galactic history. The hegemony expected another logical, predictable opponent. The Confederation expected their newest members to fail quickly and quietly. Both sides were about to learn that humans rarely do what anyone expects. While the other Confederation diplomats studied trade agreements and territorial maps, Morrison's team took a different approach. They sat in a small conference room surrounded by strange materials. Art pieces from hegemony worlds covered one wall. Music from their cultures played softly in the background. Food samples sat on the table, including some that smelled terrible to human noses. "This is weird," Amy said, holding up a hegemony sculpture. It looked like twisted metal, but somehow it felt alive. "Why are we studying their art instead of their demands?" Dr. Lisa Carter looked up from her tablet. She had spent days reading hegemony stories and myths. "Because their art tells us who they really are. Their demands only tell us what they think they want." Morrison nodded. "Every species in the galaxy has tried to beat the hegemony at their own game. Logic versus logic, facts versus facts. But what if we play a completely different game?" Commander Pete Jackson spread military reports across the table. "I have been studying their battle tactics. They are perfect. No wasted moves. No emotional decisions. They fight like computers. Exactly. Morrison said. So how do you beat a computer? You do not, Pete replied. Computers do not make mistakes. Wrong, Morrison smiled. You change the rules of the game. You make it so their perfection becomes a weakness. Amy still looked confused. I do not understand. How is being perfect a weakness? Dr. Carter answered. Because perfect systems cannot adapt to chaos. They break when something unexpected happens. Morrison stood up and walked to the wall covered with hegemony art. Look at these pieces. What do you see? Ugly sculptures? Amy guessed. Order, Lisa said quietly. Every piece follows exact patterns, mathematical harmony. No randomness at all. Right, Morrison said. Their entire culture is built on predictability. They probably think chaos is evil or dangerous. Pete laughed. Then they have never met humans. Morrison spent the next week doing something that puzzled everyone. Instead of preparing formal speeches, he told stories. War stories, love stories, funny stories about humans doing stupid things. Amy wrote them all down, not understanding why. Captain, should we not be working on our negotiation position? She asked during one storytelling session. This is our position, Morrison replied. Stories. Stories are not diplomacy. Says who? Every culture has stories. They teach lessons, share values, and help people understand each other. But I bet the hegemony does not tell stories. They probably just state facts. Meanwhile, Ambassador Zethkar and his team prepared in the traditional way. They analyzed economic data, studied legal precedents, and calculated the minimum acceptable terms for peace. Their conference room looked like a library, full of charts and reports. The humans worry me, Zethkar told his aide. They have not requested any of our research. They have not asked about hegemony negotiation history. What are they doing? His aide pulled up surveillance reports from the human preparation area. They appear to be playing games, sir. Games? Role-playing exercises. But not normal diplomatic simulations. Yesterday, Captain Morrison pretended to be a hegemony war prime trying to buy food at a human market. Zethkar rubbed his temples. This will be a disaster, but Morrison had a plan. He called it the story method. Instead of presenting logical arguments, he would tell the hegemony stories about humans who faced similar problems. Stories where everyone could win if they were creative enough. You want to tell them bedtime stories? Pete asked during a practice session. I want to show them a different way to think, Morrison corrected. Every negotiation they have ever had was about winning or losing, black or white. But human stories are full of gray areas. Dr. Carter had made an important discovery while studying hegemony psychology. They are not actually emotionless, she announced during a team meeting. They feel things, but they suppress those feelings in favor of logic. What kind of feelings? Morrison asked. Pride, mostly. And fear. They are proud of their efficiency and afraid of looking weak or foolish. Morrison smiled. Fear and pride. I can work with that. The human team practiced their approach every day. Morrison would start with a story that seemed unrelated to the negotiation. Then he would slowly connect it to the real issues. The key was making the hegemony think the solutions were their own ideas. It is like leading a horse to water, Amy observed after one practice session. Except the horse thinks it found the water by itself, Morrison agreed. 3 days before the negotiations, they received intelligence about the hegemony team. 12 war primes would attend, each representing a different hive. War Prime Scratch would lead them. She had never lost a negotiation. 12 of them and 4 of us, Pete noted. They are trying to intimidate us with numbers. Good, Morrison said. surprising everyone. The more of them there are, the more individual personalities we can work with. Dr. Carter had spent days studying each War Prime's background. They are not as unified as they pretend. Each hive has slightly different priorities. Scretch keeps them in line through force of personality. So if we can crack her authority, the others might start thinking for themselves, Morrison asked. Possibly, but it is dangerous. If we push too hard, they might unite against us out of anger. Morrison was not worried. Humans had been dealing with dangerous situations for thousands of years. Sometimes the best defense was to confuse your enemy so much they forgot to attack. Night before departure, Morrison's team received a visit from Ambassador Zethkar. The Valani diplomat looked nervous and tired. Captain Morrison, I must ask, do you have a real plan, or are you improvising? Both, Morrison answered honestly. That is not reassuring. Look, Ambassador, your people have tried the logical approach for 3 years. How has that worked out? Zethkar's blue skin darkened with embarrassment. Not well. Then trust us to try something different. What is the worst that could happen? Total diplomatic disaster. Galactic war. The end of Confederation civilization. Morrison shrugged. Well, when you put it like that, the pressure is off. We cannot possibly make things worse. As they prepared to leave for the neutral station, where negotiations would take place, Morrison gathered his team for one final briefing. Remember, we are not trying to out-logic them. We are not trying to out-intimidate them. We are trying to out-human them. What does that mean exactly? Amy asked. It means we are going to be the most human humans who ever humaned. Morrison grinned. We are going to be emotional, unpredictable, and completely impossible to calculate. And if that does not work, Pete wondered, then we tell better stories and try again. Dr. Carter looked up from her notes. I have identified their biggest psychological weakness. They cannot handle genuine uncertainty. They need to know what. Comey's next. Perfect, Morrison said. Because humans excel at making uncertainty look like a plan. As their ship departed for Deep Haven Station, Morrison felt oddly confident. Not because he knew they would win, but because he knew they would surprise everyone. And sometimes, surprise was the best weapon of all. The hegemony was expecting. Another logical, predictable negotiation. They had prepared perfect responses to every reasonable argument. But Morrison was not planning to be reasonable. He was planning to be human. And that, he hoped, would make all the difference. Deep Haven Station hung in the darkness between stars like a giant metal flower. The neutral diplomatic facility had hosted peace talks for over 200 years. Its halls had seen the end of dozens of wars, but never a war like this one. Morrison's team arrived first, along with the Confederation delegation. Ambassador Zethkar immediately began setting up his materials in the main conference room. Charts, data tablets, and legal documents covered his section of the massive table. Impressive, Amy whispered, looking at the formal setup. Morrison pulled out a single tablet and a small bag. What is in the bag? Zethkar asked nervously. Props, Morrison replied. Props? You will see. The hegemony delegation arrived 2 hours later. Morrison watched from the observation deck as 12 ships approached the station. Each ship looked like a giant insect, black and shiny with sharp edges. They moved in perfect formation, not a single ship out of place. They even fly like they think, Dr. Carter observed. The hegemony representatives entered the conference room like soldiers marching to war. 12 war primes in gleaming black armor walked in precise formation. Their insect-like faces showed no emotion. Chemical scents filled the air as they communicated with each other through smell. War Prime. Scratch led them to their side of the table. She was larger than the others, with battle scars marking her armor. Her compound eyes reflected the room's lights like mirrors. When she spoke, her voice sounded like metal scraping against stone. "We are here to accept your surrender." She announced. Ambassador Zithkar stood up carefully. "We are here to discuss terms for peace. There are no terms. You will surrender the Outer Rim territories. You will pay tribute. You will acknowledge hegemony superiority. Those terms are unacceptable. Then you will lose more worlds until they become acceptable." Morrison watched this exchange with interest. It followed exactly the pattern he had studied. The hegemony made demands. The Confederation offered alternatives. The hegemony rejected everything. Eventually, the Confederation would give up and leave. But not today. Morrison stood up slowly. All 24 eyes turned toward him. The war primes had been briefed about the humans, but seeing one in person was different. Morrison looked small and soft compared to their armored forms. "War Prime Scratch," Morrison said with a slight bow. "Thank you for coming. Before we discuss business, may I tell you a story?" The war primes looked at each other in confusion. Their chemical communications created a cloud of sharp-smelling confusion. "A story?" Scratch's voice carried surprise. "This is a negotiation, not a nursery. Among my people, stories are how we share wisdom," Morrison replied calmly. "This one is about two generals who faced an impossible choice." Scratch's mandibles clicked with irritation. "We did not come here to listen to fairy tales." "Of course not," Morrison agreed. "You came here to win. So did they." Despite their protests, the war primes found themselves listening as Morrison began his tale. His voice carried easily through the room, drawing attention without demanding it. Two human generals faced each other across a valley. Both had fought. For years, both had lost friends. Both believed their cause was just. The first general had superior numbers. A second had better position. Neither could win without destroying everything they fought to protect. Dr. Carter watched the hegemony delegation carefully. Their body language was changing. The rigid formation loosened slightly. Several war primes leaned forward without realizing it. Morrison continued. The first general could attack and probably win, but half his army would die. A second general could hold his position, but his people would starve. Traditional military thinking said one must destroy the other. What happened? Asked War Prime. Zethka before she could stop herself. Morrison smiled. They changed the rules. He reached into his bag and pulled out two small toy soldiers. Setting them on the table, he moved them as he spoke. Instead of fighting each other, they decided to fight the real enemy, the corrupt politicians who had started the war for profit, the merchants who sold weapons to both sides, the system that made war more profitable than peace. The war primes watched the toy soldiers with fascination. None of them had ever seen a negotiation that included visual aids, especially toys. Together, they uncovered the conspiracy. Together, they exposed the corruption. Together, they ended not just their war, but the system that created it. Both generals got what they really wanted: victory, honor, and peace for their people. Morrison put the toys away. The story teaches us that sometimes the enemy is not sitting across the table from you. Sometimes the real enemy is the table itself. Silence filled the room. The hegemony had expected logical arguments about territory and resources. Instead, they got a story about changing the entire game. War Prime Scratch recovered first. Amusing tale, human. But this is reality. We want the Outer Rim worlds. You will give them to us, or we will take them. Why do you want them? Morrison asked simply. The question caught everyone off guard. In 3 years of negotiations, no one had ever asked the hegemony why they wanted anything. They just assumed it was about territory or resources. Because they are strategic assets, Scretch replied automatically. For what strategy? To expand. Our influence. Why do you need to expand your influence? Scretch's mandibles clicked with annoyance. These questions are pointless. Are they? You are the most efficient military force in the galaxy. Your technology is advanced. Your organization is perfect. So why do you need more worlds? Dr. Carter noticed something interesting. The chemical communications between war primes had changed. The sharp scent of aggression was mixing with something else. Uncertainty. Morrison pressed his advantage. In my experience, when someone fights this hard for something, it is usually because they are afraid of something else. The hegemony fears nothing. War Prime Kachar declared angrily. I did not say you were afraid, Morrison replied calmly. I said you might be fighting to avoid something you fear. There is a difference. Ambassador Zethkar watched this exchange with growing amazement. Morrison was doing something impossible. He was making the hegemony think about their motivations, instead of just stating their demands. You want to know what we fear? Scretch asked dangerously. I want to understand what you need, Morrison corrected, because I think what you need and what you want might be different things. Commander Pete Jackson saw the trap Morrison was setting. By asking questions instead of making statements, he was forcing the hegemony to examine their own logic. And any logic could be questioned. We need respect, War Prime Yechok said suddenly, then looked shocked at her own words. Scretch turned on her subordinate with fury. Silence! But the damage was done. Morrison had cracked their unified front by making them think as individuals, instead of as a collective. Respect, Morrison repeated thoughtfully. That is not something you can take by force. We have taken 37 worlds by force, Scretch growled. And has that earned you respect? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Every War Prime knew the answer. The galaxy feared the hegemony, but no one respected them. They were seen as brutal conquerors, not as equals. Morrison reached into his bag again and pulled out a small mirror. May I show you something? He set the mirror in the center of the table. This represents how the galaxy sees you now. Reflect honestly. Do you see respect or fear? The War Primes stared at their own reflections. For the first time in the negotiation, they saw themselves as others might see them. Armored conquerors demanding tribute from weaker species. What do you propose? Scretch asked quietly. Morrison smiled. I propose we change the story. Instead of the hegemony versus the Confederation, what if it became the hegemony and the Confederation versus the real problems facing our galaxy? What problems? Several War Primes asked at once. Piracy, resource shortages, unexplored regions full of unknown dangers, climate disasters affecting dozens of worlds. These are enemies worthy of the hegemony's skills. Dr. Carter held her breath. Morrison was offering them something they had never considered. A chance to be heroes instead of villains. War Prime Scretch stood up abruptly. We require time to consider these unusual proposals. Of course, Morrison replied. Take all the time you need. As the hegemony delegation filed out of the room, their perfect formation was broken. Several War Primes walked together, talking in low voices. Others moved alone. Deep in thought, Ambassador Zethkar approached Morrison with wonder in his eyes. How did you do that? I asked them to see themselves through someone else's eyes, Morrison replied. No one likes what they see when they really look. Amy was busy taking notes. Do you think it worked? Morrison watched the last War Prime leave the room. Ask me tomorrow. Today, we planted seeds. Tomorrow, we see if anything grows. The hegemony meeting room buzzed with angry chemical signals. For the first time in memory, the War Primes were arguing with each other instead of following their leader without question. The human is using mind tricks, War Prime Ketchar insisted, her mandibles clicking rapidly. We should end these talks immediately. What mind tricks? War Prime Yechok challenged. He asked us questions. Are we afraid of questions? We are afraid of nothing. Ketchar shot back. Then why are you so upset by a simple story? War Prime Scretch watched her subordinates with growing concern. In 3 years of war, they had never disagreed about strategy. The hegemony's strength came from unity of purpose. But the humans' words had introduced something dangerous into their ranks, doubt. The humans spoke of respect. War Prime Zefka said quietly, "When did we last receive respect instead of fear?" "Fear is better than respect," Ketchar declared. "Fear makes enemies surrender. Fear also makes enemies fight harder," Yechok pointed out. "Respected enemies can become allies. Feared enemies never stop trying to destroy you." Scretch raised one clawed hand for silence. "Enough. We will analyze the humans' proposals logically." War Prime next then. What are the strategic advantages of the human suggestions? The intelligence specialist consulted her data tablet. If we partner with the Confederation against external threats, we gain access to their technology and resources without the cost of occupying hostile territory. And the disadvantages? We lose the psychological advantage of fear. Other species might see cooperation as weakness. War Prime Yechok made a sound like grinding metal. Or they might see it as confidence. Only the strong can afford to show mercy. Meanwhile, in their own meeting room, Morrison's team was analyzing the hegemony's reaction. "I think we shocked them," Dr. Carter reported. "Their chemical communications showed high levels of confusion and internal conflict." "Good," Morrison replied. "Confusion means they are thinking instead of just reacting." Ambassador Zethkar looked worried. "But what if they decide to walk away from the negotiations entirely? We could lose our only chance for peace." "Then we're never going to get peace anyway," Morrison said calmly. "Real peace requires both sides to want it. If they are not willing to consider new approaches, they were always going to keep fighting." Commander Pete Jackson had been studying intelligence reports. "Our sources inside their delegation report unusual activity. Several war primes are meeting in small groups instead of following standard hierarchy protocols. Individual thinking," Dr. Carter observed. "Exactly what we hoped for." Amy was less optimistic. What if individual thinking leads them to individual conclusions? They might not all agree on the same solution. Morrison smiled. That would be even better. A unified enemy is dangerous. A divided enemy is manageable. But divided allies working toward the same goal? That is unstoppable. The next morning brought an unexpected development. Instead of requesting a formal session, War Prime Scretch asked to meet with Morrison privately. This broke every hegemony protocol about negotiations. They met in a small conference room with only a translator present. Scretch's armor seemed less intimidating in the smaller space. Her compound eyes studied Morrison carefully. "Your story yesterday," she began without preamble, "about the two generals. It was not just a story, was it?" Morrison shook his head. "It was based on something that really happened. During our Civil War, two enemy commanders realized they were both being used by politicians who profited from the conflict. And they truly joined forces? They did. Instead of destroying each other, they exposed the corruption that had started the war. Both got what they really wanted: peace for their people and justice for the fallen." Scretch was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice carried a strange note Morrison had not heard before: uncertainty. "The hegemony began this. War for honor," she said slowly. "We were ignored by the Confederation for decades, dismissed as primitive insects. When we developed advanced technology, they still treated us as inferiors." Morrison nodded. "Respect has to be earned, but it also has to be offered. Sounds like the Confederation failed on both counts. We decided to take by force what should have been given freely. Recognition as equals. How has that worked out? Scretch's mandibles clicked with what might have been humor. We are feared throughout the galaxy. But fear is not respect. Fear is just another form of dismissal. Morrison leaned forward. What if I told you there was a way to earn genuine respect? Not just from the Confederation, but from every species in the galaxy? I would say you are either very clever or very naive. Maybe both. Here is what I see. The hegemony has the best military organization in known space. Your logistics are perfect. Your discipline is unmatched. Your technology is advanced. But you are using all of that to conquer territory that will never truly belong to you. What would you have us conquer instead? Morrison pulled out his tablet and showed her a galactic map. Problems. Real problems that affect everyone. Space pirates who prey on trade routes. Natural disasters that devastate entire systems. Unexplored regions where unknown dangers might be lurking. Scratch studied the map. You want us to become galactic peacekeepers. I want you to become what you already are, but use it for something bigger than territorial expansion. The galaxy needs what the hegemony offers: organization, efficiency, and the ability to get things done. And in return, partnership instead of conquest, respect instead of fear, a seat at the table as equals, instead of standing outside demanding entry. Scratch was quiet for a long time. Her chemical scent had changed from aggression to something more complex. Morrison waited patiently. There is resistance among my subordinates, she finally admitted. Some believe cooperation is weakness. And what do you believe? I believe. I believe I am tired of being feared, but I do not know if the hegemony can change. We have been warriors for so long. Morrison reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. It was a medal from his military service. This was given to me for destroying an enemy position. I kept it for years as a symbol of victory. He set it on the table between them. But you know what I am proudest of? 3 years later, I met one of the enemy soldiers I had fought against. We talked for hours. By the end of the conversation, we understood each other. That understanding did more for peace than any battle I ever won. You became friends with your enemy? I learned that he was never really my enemy. We were both just soldiers following orders, fighting for causes we believed in. The real enemies were the systems that made war inevitable. Scratch reached out and touched the medal with one clawed finger. You think the hegemony and confederation could become friends? I think you could become something better than friends. Partners. Allies working toward the same goals. And what goals would those be? Morrison stood up and walked to the window. Deep Haven Station hung surrounded by stars. A tiny island of peace in a vast ocean of darkness. Making sure the galaxy stays civilized. Making sure trade routes stay safe. Making sure that when new species develop space travel, they find a community ready to welcome them instead of exploit them. A noble vision, Scretch said quietly. But can it work in practice? Only one way to find out. Are you willing to try? Scretch stood up as well. At her full height, she towered over Morrison. But somehow, she no longer seemed intimidating. I will need to convince the other war primes. Some will resist change. Change is hard, Morrison agreed. But staying the same when the old way is not working, that is harder. You have given me much to consider, Captain Morrison, perhaps. Perhaps it is time for the hegemony to write a new story. As she left the room, Morrison felt a spark of hope. For the first time since the negotiations began, peace seemed possible. Not the peace of surrender or conquest, but the peace of partnership. Real work was just beginning. The formal negotiation session, 3 days later, looked completely different from the first meeting. The war primes no longer sat in rigid formation. Instead, they had arranged themselves in small groups around the table. Some sat with Confederation representatives discussing specific proposals. Others worked with human team members on implementation details. War Prime Scratch called for attention. The hegemony has reached a decision. Ambassador Zethkar tensed, preparing for either victory or disaster. Morrison remained calm, watching the body language of individual war primes. "We reject the terms of surrender proposed by the Confederation," Scratch announced. Shocked silence filled the room. Then she continued, "We also reject our own demands for territorial conquest. Instead, we propose something that has never been tried before in galactic history." She gestured to War Prime Yechok, who stood up with a data tablet. "The hegemony offers to transform military forces into a galactic peacekeeping organization. We will protect trade routes, respond to natural disasters, and explore dangerous regions of space. In return, we ask for equal representation in the Confederation, council, and formal recognition as a founding member of what we propose to call the Galactic Defense Alliance." The Confederation representatives looked stunned. Morrison smiled quietly. Yechuke continued, "We have identified 47 specific problems currently affecting galactic civilization. Pirate fleets operating in 12 systems. 3 planets requiring emergency disaster relief. 7 unexplored regions with potential threats. We can begin operations immediately. This is unprecedented," Ambassador Zethkar stammered. "Unprecedented times require unprecedented solutions," Morrison replied. "The question is, are you willing to try something new?" Dr. Carter had been monitoring hegemony chemical communications throughout the presentation. Their scent signatures indicate complete sincerity. This is not a trick or negotiation tactic. They genuinely want to try this approach. Commander Pete Jackson studied the operational details Yechok had presented. These plans are thorough and practical. They have obviously spent considerable time working out the logistics. "When did you develop these proposals?" Amy asked. "War Prime." Sefka answered, "Over the past 3 days." After Captain Morrison's story about the 2 generals, we began asking ourselves what we really wanted to achieve. Conquest was never the goal. Recognition and purpose were the goals. "And you believe peacekeeping will provide both?" Zethkar asked. "We believe it will provide something better," Scretch replied. "The chance to be remembered as protectors instead of conquerors." The negotiations continued for 2 more days, but the atmosphere had completely changed. Instead of demands and rejections, there were discussions about details and implementations. The War Primes worked directly with Confederation specialists to design new institutions and procedures. Morrison watched with satisfaction as former enemies became partners. The breakthrough had come not from logic or force, but from helping each side see themselves through different eyes. "You realize what you have done?" Ambassador Zethkar asked him during a break. "Started something, I hope. You have changed the entire nature of galactic diplomacy. For centuries, negotiations have been about dividing things up. Territory, resources, power. You showed us how to create something new instead." Morrison shrugged. "Humans are good at making things up as we go along. Sometimes that is exactly what the situation needs." The final agreement ceremony took place in Deep Haven's Grand Assembly Hall. Representatives from all 43 Confederation species attended, along with observers from dozens of neutral worlds. The document they signed created new institutions, new procedures, and new possibilities for galactic civilization. War Prime Scretch, now carrying the title Defense Prime Scretch, spoke first. 6 months ago, the hegemony was at war with the Confederation. Today, We begin a partnership that we hope will bring security and prosperity to the entire galaxy. This transformation was possible because one human asked us to imagine a different story. She turned to Morrison. Captain Morrison showed us that the most powerful weapon in any conflict is not superior firepower or perfect logic. It is the willingness to see your opponent as a potential partner. Morrison approached the podium for his own remarks. The hall fell silent. When I was asked to join these negotiations, many people thought it was a desperate mistake. Humans were too new, too unpredictable, too emotional for serious diplomacy. They were probably right about all of those things. Gentle laughter rippled through the audience. But sometimes being unpredictable is exactly what a situation needs. The hegemony and confederation had fought the same war in the same way for 3 years. Everyone knew their moves. Everyone could predict their strategies. Breaking that pattern required someone willing to break the rules. He looked out at the mixed audience of former enemies now sitting together. What we accomplished here was not really about superior negotiation techniques or clever psychology. It was about remembering that every conflict is ultimately between individuals, not abstract forces. And individuals can always choose to write a new story. 6 months later, Captain Morrison received a message that made him smile. It was from Defense Prime Scretch, reporting on the Galactic Defense Alliance's first major operation. Captain Morrison, the message began, "I thought you would want to know that our joint fleet has successfully eliminated the pirate organization that had been terrorizing the Outer Rim for the past 5 years. Confederation and hegemony ships worked together with perfect coordination. More importantly, the rescued civilians cheered when they saw our ships arriving. They were not afraid. They were grateful. The Alliance has received requests for assistance from 17 different systems. 3 neutral worlds have asked to join our organization. The galactic community is beginning to see us as protectors rather than conquerors. But perhaps most significantly, yesterday, War Prime Ketchar asked me to tell her a story about human military tactics. When I asked why, she said she wanted to understand how humans think about problems differently from other species. The student has become the teacher. Thank you for showing us that the strongest position in any negotiation is not the one that cannot be moved, but the one that can adapt to find solutions no one else could see." Morrison forwarded the message to his team. Amy responded within minutes. "Does this mean we are good at diplomacy now?" "It means we are good at being human," Morrison replied. "Which, sometimes, is exactly what the galaxy needs." Dr. Carter's analysis was more detailed. The psychological transformation we witnessed was remarkable. The hegemony went from a rigid hierarchy focused on conquest to a flexible organization focused on service. The key was helping them see that their strengths could be used for protection instead of domination. Commander Pete Jackson had a different perspective. From a strategic standpoint, we turned our greatest enemy into our most valuable ally. The hegemony's military efficiency, combined with Confederation resources and human creativity, has created the most effective peacekeeping force in galactic history. But Morrison's favorite response came from an unexpected source. Ambassador Zeph Carr sent a personal note saying simply, "You taught an old diplomat that there is always another way to solve a problem. The galaxy is safer because humans are willing to try new approaches to old conflicts." A year later, the Galactic Defense Alliance had grown to include representatives from over 60 species. Former pirates had become convoy escorts. Former enemies had become friends. And throughout the galaxy, when species faced seemingly impossible conflicts, they began asking a new question. Not, how do we defeat our enemies? But how do we turn our enemies into partners? It was, Morrison reflected, a very human way to think about problems. And sometimes that made all the difference. The war that had seemed impossible to end had become a piece that no one had dared to imagine. And it had all started with one simple idea, that every story could have a different ending if someone was brave enough to write it.